It's your boy.
Hello, Craig. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode here at Actual Play Broadcast. Today we are doing player portfolio. Kind of
Yeah.
goal with this episode, look at character creation.
Yeah. We're probably going to talk about this a couple times in a lot of, not a lot, but in a few different ways. Because this is both straightforward, but also very, I don't want to say complicated, but involved conversation from multiple
Yeah,
angles.
and you know, there are a lot of ways that a person should. I just want to touch on this briefly. There are a lot of ways to go about making a character. You can make a very flawed character. You can make a character that's not good at the thing that you want them to be good at. Like if you make a mage, and like if you make a wizard in D&D and give them low int, you can, or you make a highly optimized character. We're not looking to touch on those at the moment. That's going to be its own entire conversation.
Yeah.
We're more looking at like how do you get started before we worry about philosophies of making a character.
Yeah. Oftentimes, the hurdle a lot of people may encounter, especially newer people who may not be very familiar with playing these kinds of games. Maybe it's their first time playing these kinds of games, or maybe perhaps you are or you know somebody who maybe has played these games before, but this is also like a challenge for them regularly to come up with an idea. So we're going to help kind of talk about maybe some strategies to at least get the ball rolling, get the rock pushed down the hill so it can get some momentum, some common methods perhaps, as
Yeah.
well as some general good things to keep in mind. We'll probably touch on some mechanical thoughts here and there, but obviously this is not geared towards a specific system. This isn't necessarily a 100% foolproof, you'll always have the bestest character kind of thing, because ultimately this is a creative process. You know, we can't just hand you a formula like Mad Libs and just be like, just fill in whatever you want, it'll be great. Uh, there's still very much a what you put into it is going to determine what you get out of it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to talk about.
And I just want to throw a statement up front immediately when it comes to designing a character. If you're designing a character whose entire purpose is to annoy another player at the table or the GM at the table, without that person being in on the joke, you're an asshole. You're being an asshole. Don't make a character like an asshole. Simple
Unless
concept.
everybody at the table consents to it.
Be careful about that. That is,
Yeah, there's, you know, you need to communicate your clear intent,
yeah. If you're making a
because
joke
it's
character
one
and everyone's
hand. Yeah, if you're gonna say, oh, well, I'm gonna be like this, and you're gonna tell them you're gonna be like a 7 on the asshole scale, and they're all like, oh yeah, okay, cool, and then you bring asshole at 11, then people are gonna be like, no, that's not fun.
yeah. If everyone's good for the joke, then go ahead. There are a number of GMs and players out there where the concept of a joke character makes them violently apprehensive.
Hmm.
Um, and that is, within their bounds of their comfort. There are some people who, if you come up with something that's just like, oh, this is like a funny joke concept, like making a bard um what are they called? The artificial people in D&D.
Oh,
Warforged. If you make a
yes.
bard Warforged and you name them gender because gender is a social construct, and they look at you and like you're a piece of shit. No, we're not doing that. Give me an actual serious character concept.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to offer it up as a joke. If they get clearly offended by it, that's a different conversation to have. I know a person who saw that concept like floated around as a joke. No one said they were going to do this. They just put it forward as a joke. They got IRL mad.
Yeah.
Zemian here is very familiar with that person.
Yeah, I'm somebody who is, I don't want to say vehemently against joke characters. I don't care if people play joke characters in their games or whatever. I am just not looking for that kind of experience, generally speaking, unless it's going to be like a very brief campaign, like
Yeah.
a few sessions maybe, or maybe a one-off. If we're doing that, then beer and pretzels type hilarity is fine, but otherwise I want serious characters in my game, whether I'm playing or running. So I generally don't have these issues of having, shall we say, mixed expectations or intentions, because I'm generally very clear in my session zero is what I'm looking for and what I want out of people, and kind of not being an overbearing like helicopter GM, in being overbearing in the way of you have to do this, or this. More, this is what we're doing for the game. If there's anything that rails against that, it's just a hard no. But otherwise, here's my expectations. Here are the options.
Yeah.
Go nuts.
And
If you're not
like I said,
sure or want clarification, ask. Especially if something you're like, I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to fit. Like, for example, when I went to run Aldfair, Ali heavily considered playing a ranger. And he did the smart thing and asked, like, is playing a ranger a good idea in this game? Because rangers are very favored enemy focused. And while certain enemy types would certainly come up, that's not exactly all fair shtick. So it's like, it's probably not, but you could if you really wanted to, but probably not.
and
But
so like
otherwise, it's do whatever.
that's one of the first things I would recommend keeping in mind is keep in mind your, I'm gonna say for a lack of a better term, your audience. But the audience is the other players at the table and your GM when you're going to make a character concept. If everyone is like, hey, we're on board to do a certain kind of thing, and then you sign off on that thing, and then you show up at the table with not the thing you discussed without letting any of them know, doesn't look great. Not a great start.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, character concepts should, in my opinion, as you go through longer form campaigns, should evolve and change. That's a good thing. That's good storytelling. If people buck against that, that's something you have to work out with everyone. But I think, and just personally, in my opinion, and that's part of it, in my opinion, not your GMs, not your other players that you're playing with, that is good storytelling. Now, that's just like general, like, table manners, is what we'll call it. Let's talk about, like, actually generating a concept. Because a lot of books will say, "Oh, get a character concept," and give a brief paragraph on describing how to like generate a character concept, how to come up with a character concept.
Yeah, which, to be clear, we will have a GM Grimoire episode kind of talking about this portion of putting a game together, of putting the guardrails down for character creation and setting expectations for the game, as well as managing like limitations and presenting options and expectations and all of that. So if you're interested in the GM side of stuff, this is probably still worth listening because that'll help give you insight for when we have that conversation. But
Yeah.
this is definitely explicitly more for the player side of things. But there will be more. This is a big conversation.
And I want to hand this off to Zemian to go over because I'm fairly simple, my character concepts for the most part. I'm
Well,
not I'm very vanilla. Uh Other than usually from what I can tell a fascination with gore that your characters have. Most them usually they're different.
why do
I
you
will
gotta
not
attack me like this?
because I know you.
It's not fair.
How many of your vampire
uh,
characters have fucking one of the what's the Zemichi fucking power?
dude.
Yeah, that. How many of
Yeah,
them?
and not many of them. You forget I don't get to play very much,
Fair.
so I generally have played a not as much as I would have wanted, but a good mix of things. But Smisi is absolutely one of the things I've played a couple times. So, it's valid.
Yeah.
It is valid.
Like you
So,
generally variety is my main point.
yes. I do have my preferences, and like as a player, having preferences, it can, like, it's not inherently a bad thing. It can be, well, I mean, it depends on your play group. Because some people are fine with being in a very specific niche and that's all they ever want to do. But if you have a lot of people in your group who want to do a lot of variety of things, but say in the context of D&D, say there's that one person in the group who only ever wants to play wizard. Maybe there's other people in the group that want to play wizard, but they're not comfortable playing a wizard when somebody else in the group already is a wizard because they don't want to overlap. And so they never get to play a wizard because that one person in the group only ever plays wizard. That might be a little annoying. So if you're that kind of person who does stick to a niche, I mean, I would suggest trying to stretch your wings a little bit. But ultimately, if that's all you ever want to play and you do have more variety of people, have that conversation and be like, hey, we can play the same class, let's just work together and make sure that we're not overlapping. So we're not taking the same exact spells and stealing each other's spotlight all the time. Or maybe you just don't care about overlap at all, depending on who
Yeah.
you are. That said, I guess I'll speak a little bit from how I go about generally making characters. And then I can kind of talk a little bit about how I know some other people do it or other common methods some people will use. Me personally, I think I've actually mentioned this a little bit in a previous recording that we did. Actually, no, this was in the Lord of Darkness podcast. That's not out yet. If this comes out ahead of that time,
No.
but
What's that?
yeah, it's a potentially upcoming, if not out yet, podcast where friend of the podcast Florian will be joining me, and we talk about some World of Darkness stuff, starting with Demon the Fallen, deep diving on the lore. But my thing is, typically when I get a new RPG, one of the first things I do is go to the character creation section. Almost exclusively, will ignore everything else and go to character creation. Because that is one of my biggest pulls to tabletops is being able to make my own characters. Because, as a kid, I played a lot of video games, watched a lot of movies, and anytime I was allowed any kind of customization, I was much more invested. Because sure, playing a video game is cool, but actually getting to make my own character in that thing was just the coolest thing ever. So obviously when I found out about tabletop RPGs being a thing, I was just like, fuck yes. So whenever I get an RPG, my first question is, what can I make? What can I do in this game? And that means I jump to the character creation section. Sometimes at my detriment, because, some of these games will say, hey, this is what you do in this game, like in chapter 1, and character creation is in chapter 4. But it is what it is. That's just how I operate. I'll get there eventually. So normally my approach is it's kind of mechanical in nature, but not inherently. I go to the character creation section. I look, what are the options? What are the things I can do? And I look for that thing that I'm like, this, I want to do this. For when we did Eclipse Phase, I sat down and was like, okay, this sounds cool. This sounds cool. I did in our little one shot pick the psychic option. I can't remember explicitly what it was called.
Async.
But yeah, async. And didn't really get to do much with it though. So I was still like intrigued by that option and glanced at how the rules for some of that worked, what some of the options were. And then I found an option within it that I was like, oh yes, I have to. Which was the xenomorph infection type for the async. Which was not explicitly body horror, kind of like psychological body horror. So I was like, yep, that ticked a box. We're playing this. And then the rest kind of falls into place for me of, okay, I'm going to be playing this thing. What stats do I need to do that? How does stat generation and all that work? And then kind of just putting the blocks into place there, making sure essentially that whatever the core mechanical concept of the character is, I'm meeting the needs for that so I can actually play it. I know there are some people out there who think it's I won't be mean. I will be charitable and say they find it interesting to gimp their stats that they need to do things, like the people who think it's fun and interesting to play an intelligence 11 wizard in D&D. I think that is a choice one can make that I do not approve of and do not allow my players to do for reasons. We'll get into that. But right now, building out the attributes to be able to functionally do the thing reasonably well, at least, and then go from there. If it's something where it's only like one toggle and I have a lot of freedom beyond that, then I'll fill that out. So this was one of those situations where it really wasn't a huge investment to be an async for me for what we were playing. So I was like, well, what skill set do I want to have? I could realistically be anything outside of that. Ultimately decided, well, I'm doing this. The xenomorph async is very much like psychologically there's an alien inside of you, effectively. And it has a very physical nature to it. And my mind is, if this is going to be like this wild alien animal inside of me, all the scarier it'll be if I were to lose control of myself and I am a combat monster. Like, I do know how to fight and I am capable. Because if I can't throw a punch, like, that's not going to be scary if that thing comes out and decides to get turbo territorial or what have you. You know, it's, imagine the turbo calculus nerd in high school who's 120 pounds soaking wet goes into a berserker rage. Not going to be very scary versus, the 300-pound linebacker who's, on the senior team for football at your school, losing control of himself and being a physical threat. So it's not me planning to hurt the party, but I'm thinking of this in terms of what is interesting for the story, what is dramatically interesting and thematically appropriate to the kind of character I'm playing as well as the game we're playing. It feels a little lame and lackluster if I wouldn't be that kind of physical character and have this kind of aspect happening. So I sit down and I look, okay, what does combat look like? What kind of fighting do I want to do? Because at least in Eclipse phase, you have a lot of options for that. You can be very focused into guns or very focused into melee. And so in those kinds of systems, those are choices to be made. And I kind of decided I wanted to be just a pretty decent all-rounder, but with more of a leaning towards guns. But I was able to have pretty decent melee out the gate on top of being really good at shooting.
Yeah.
And for the most part, like, there's probably some really prime async ability choices, but when it comes to a lot of stuff like that, I generally try to pick a build when I'm like playing any kind of like magic character or any kind of equivalent. I try to pick powers that I feel are going to be the most fun to use. There is a degree of, okay, well, I understand how powers work in this setting. This one is not necessarily the most fun pick, but it is incredibly useful. And I do kind of split the difference there where I do pick some useful stuff, but I try to keep an amount of wiggle room for me to pick stuff that it's like I should absolutely have this and stuff that is just fun choices. Like, did I need to take Basilisk Stare? No. Is it really good and really fun? Yes.
It is definitely one of the more fun. One of my favorite things that they did from Eclipse Phase 1 into 2 was just like, well, asyncs are actually really fucking based. What if we gave them more shit to do, like power wise? Because
Yeah.
it used to primarily just be I read thoughts, and like it was around like that area. But moving forward with the conversation at hand,
Yeah. I
I'm
think it's important to note that I generally tend to do things in an almost sort of backwards way compared to what a lot of people do. I generally determine a decent chunk, not all of them, but a decent chunk of mechanics for my character before I determine the story for the character. And as I'm building the mechanics, some of the story starts to trickle in. And as more of that trickles in, that informs more of the decisions I'm making. I generally do not come in with a fully fledged, I want to play this character who can do this. They have this backstory. They have this name. This is what matters to them, blah, 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 and then start building the character. I don't do that. There are some people that do that. I don't. Because what happens is I get a very specific idea in my head, and I sit down with the system and then try to build it. And then I can't do it in the system. Perhaps the system cannot accurately represent that character, or perhaps what ends up getting imagined ends up being maybe too powerful to be represented with the character creation rules we have for that game, or some other key aspect just doesn't fit, and then it has to be changed. And that's something that takes a lot of wind out of my sails when I'm making a character. Because if I get, 50, 60, 80% done with the character, and then it's like, hey, that actually doesn't work with this game, I kind of lose interest in that character, and I almost need to start over sometimes. Because I had a particular vision. And when that vision gets fucked with, it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll just throw that out the window and start over.
And go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do give advice based off of come up with an idea of something first. I'm very much the opposite mind of go look at what the options are. Find what sounds fun to you and then build from there and then flesh things out. Obviously, I'm not saying this is the correct way to do things, but it is a way and my preferred way.
Is absolutely a way, and there's nothing wrong with that. I, however, like to play a specific kind of character for a number of reasons. I enjoy playing characters that, for the most part, are fairly tanky. There are exceptions to such a thing. One would be St. Cloud. St. Cloud is very much it's like I'm a decker and I'm going to support from the back. Typically, I prefer to play in the front. I prefer to be a melee based fighter of some sort, usually a paladin, someone that has, righteous fury and fervor attached to them. Not necessarily needing the religious zeal, but part of the reason why I enjoy that class fantasy is due to the fact that I get to act as a number of things. I get to act as our frontline tank. So, I'm okay with getting hit. I don't need people to worry about me being hit. And I usually play the character roleplay wise is like, no, I'm fine. My character could be, gasping for fucking HP at that point. And that's maybe when he'll ask for assistance. And that's if it's offered. But, you know, another thing that I typically don't have to do in games is you don't usually have to roll for your defensive attributes. Typically. Some games do make you roll for those, but that's fine. You can usually still build a competent character around defense. And in so doing, my dog shit rolls that I enjoy having, I enjoy being a lie, become less important in the grand scheme of everything that's going on. So it serves a number of purposes. Typically, I also end up acting as a moral compass, or I attempt to. Again, kind of supports the idea of playing a paladin. Not everyone wants that. Not everyone needs that. But if you get a bunch of players that have their own idea of doing a thing, and the players themselves aren't communicating what they're trying to do, or they don't even know what they're trying to do, they're just improving and going, having someone who can say, this is our objective. This is what we need to get done. How do we get this done? What are we doing for that? And then you'll have some people who go, oh, I have an idea for that. And you'll have other people who's like, oh, I completely forgot about that. Having someone that can do that is usually good for overall play experience. Having a party dad or mom or uh a parental figure is usually helpful, if anything, to keep the game going. Unless, of course, you are playing that more beer and pretzels kind of play, where you sit down a room for a couple hours with your buddies, and the entire time you're all just sitting there bullshitting. Perfectly fine. If you're
Yeah.
not trying to tell a story, you're just there to enjoy each other's company and then make a story as you go, feel free. But if you're doing more structured play, having someone who can act as like, hey, focus up, we're going in this direction. Part of that, and this is something that I need to work on myself, is having a player who is your designated door kicker. It doesn't make a lot of sense for your high society, prim and proper, think first, act later person to be the individual that presses the big red button to make things move forward. Uh, Players can find themselves in analysis paralysis, and sometimes the group needs a designated door kicker.
Yeah, naturally, this is very dependent on your play group.
Correct.
If you have a play group that is a bunch of button pushers, don't need to really have a dedicated one at that point,
Nope.
obviously.
You got plenty.
If you do have a bunch of people who are going to sit there and analyze until the end of time, maybe somebody needs to be the one willing to take that L to press the buttons.
Yep. And if
I
that's
mean,
not you, that's fine.
yeah, not that it's needed per se. If you all enjoy sitting down and spending an hour discussing what to do next, by all means, do that. However, if you, I don't know, perhaps you are a Critical Role fan and you want to more closely emulate that experience, I'll tell you to temper your expectations, but obviously you're not going to get that by everybody sitting around us and discussing for an hour what to do over something simple. Like all of them as players are generally pretty quick to make decisions.
Yep. And then they'll sit there
So
and like roast each other later for it, and that's fine if like the decision doesn't work out. But, you know,
as long as it's in good fun.
yeah, as long as
If you're
everyone's like,
gonna if you're gonna be a player who is going to grill somebody over a choice their character made in the game, you need to dial it back. Like it's just it's a game. It's supposed to be fun. Sure, there's something to be said about making stupid decisions and being like, "Hey, that was just a really dumb thing to do." And if the party as a whole has a problem with that decision being made, maybe it's time to have a group discussion. But otherwise, if they just made a choice that maybe just wasn't the optimal thing to do, yeah, welcome to humanity. Newsflash. That's 99% of what we do is unoptimal decisions. So
yeah,
let it slide.
yeah.
I've
That's
I've recently dealt with a player who was very adverse to shall we say making mistakes for both himself and the party as the whole. Not super fun.
yep. There's a certain degree of having to like let go.
Yep.
But back to the discussion on character concepts. One of the things that you can easily do, and I guarantee you a lot of people do this when they're making a character, especially for the first time. They go, I want to be X in X. I want to be Sherlock Holmes in medieval times. I want to be Deadpool in medieval times. I want to be King Arthur in space.
I'm gonna say it.
Uh,
I
say
hate this shit. I hate it so much. But I'll say this with a caveat. If you are doing it for a matter of this is where I want to pull my inspiration from, I'm fine with that in my games. Like, I just want to play a very Sherlock Holmes-esque character. I'm cool with that. If you come with me and you hand me a character sheet with the name Sherlock Holmes on it, I'm sending you back to character creation. That's not the games I'm running. And honestly, if the GM has not explicitly said that we're playing that kind of game, don't be that person. Because chances are there's probably people in the group who are not okay with you just playing Sherlock Holmes or Deadpool or Guts or whoever your character fascination is at the time. Like, it's cool that you like a character that much that you want to roleplay that character, but there is, in my experience, a lot of people who do not enjoy that, but don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, so they don't say anything. And they just let it happen, even though they don't like it. Because this is a game where you get to make your own characters and play what you want, right? You should be allowed to do what you want. And that's where the caveat is, as long as everybody's having fun. But we have a lot of people in the hobby who are not socially adept or are not comfortable with any type of confrontation. So if you're seriously considering playing a named character from an established IP, you need to talk to the GM. But if the GM is like, we're playing Curse of Strahd, or I don't know, we're playing the Transylvania Chronicles out of Word of Darkness, or we're running my homebrew setting, Deadpool is probably not going to fit as a character concept. So, or any character from another established IP, not really actually going to fit. Now, you want to take inspiration from, say, Deadpool and make something that fits within the context of the game world, but you take aspects of that personality, sure, but still, communicate with the group because, maybe fourth wall breaking meta humor, using the Deadpool example, is not a good fit for the type of game you're doing. I imagine most groups playing Curse of Strahd does not want a Deadpool guy making comments about, man, he should have put more points into his stealth skill in the middle of the Curse of Strahd game. Some groups might be fine with that, but most Curse of Strahd groups are probably going to want to cleave to a more serious bent. So, read the room, talk to the GM, make sure everybody's cool with what you're doing. But in general, nah. Anytime people have been like, I want to play this character from this, I'm like, what do you mean? If you think you're actually going to play that character, no, you're not.
Elaborate.
Just up front. Yeah.
And like my main purpose of what I'm saying is like drawing inspirations. Like I want to play this person. Isn't meant to be like a one-to-one. I'm playing that person. Don't try to play a one-to-one character because you do a couple of things. A, you can bother people. Not guaranteeing that you are going to, but you can. But then you run into a situation where a lot of character decisions and interpretations, you are now burdened with having to either regurgitate those decisions and repeat them, or try to understand the writer of that character at the time of certain decision making. And that's if that character consistently makes that decision. Let alone if they, fucking are pancakey about it and they flop back and forth. It's you are actively harming, because I've seen this happen. You are actively harming your enjoyment of the character because you are forcing yourself to be in that character's shoes and actively are the one making decisions. Because then now you have to interpret that character's decisions and interpret the scenario and how they'd be acting in there. That's not fun for anybody. There are people online who have those arguments all the damn time, and you probably have been a person that's looked at that, pointed at them, and laughed. And it's just like, why are you arguing about this? This is stupid.
Yeah. That's my
Um,
general advice. Just don't.
yeah,
Make your
just
own character. Pull inspirations if you want. Be specific about what it is about that character you want to emulate,
yeah,
and make sure it actually fits with the game that you're running. Which is still is in general something that applies when you are making a character. You want to make sure that character is appropriate for the game you're playing. Same thing with joke characters. You're not going to bring a joke character into a serious game. Like, read the room, understand what the game is, bring something appropriate. Like I said with Deadpool and Curse of Strahd, you're probably not going to do it unless your group is taking a far more casual approach to Curse of Strahd.
like typically what I would recommend people do when they're looking for character concepts, if they're just like, oh, I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to emulate certain aspects of a character. Okay, that's fine. What do you really enjoy about this setting, about this game? It's like, oh, I really enjoy, magic. Okay, so we have entire options for that. What kind of magic do you want to play around with? It's like, well, I also like animals. Cool. You could make a druid. You can make not a druid that focuses on like polymorph or find familiar. There you have a lot of you just have to sit down and ask yourself the question of what do I think would be fun? What do I think would be fun? A number of times I see a fun concept in my mind would be it's like, okay, I want to make a ranger. What kind of ranger? I don't know. I kind of want to play a cowboy. It's like, okay, well, there's hand crossbows. Okay, well, what can I do with that? Well, you could be a fighter instead of a ranger. If you're in 5e, that's the optimal choice.
True. Very true.
Also, more fun options in fucking fighter. I'm not gonna get into that. We have an entire review on that. Go watch it.
Yeah.
Um, listen, watch words. You get it.
Yeah.
But like simple things like that, taking yourself down a little decision tree of what do I want? I want X. How can I make this book and the system fit into X? Done. You just have to start finding options. There are some systems out there in the world that don't really do that super well, in my opinion, on a mechanical level, as
Yeah.
some systems prefer you go, oh, well, I'm going to be a space cowboy and I'm going to also be a guitarist. It's like, okay, how do you make that into a character concept? Like mechanically. Oh, I don't have to worry about doing that mechanically. There are no mechanics in this game. I just am good at I'm just good at, space, shooting guns, and making music. So I am now a space cowboy that's also a guitarist.
And
And
now
there is no
one to
mechanical
system
backing.
where space is a role.
Well,
I'm really
space
good at
skills.
space. I have a 6 in space.
I have a 6 in space. Uh,
Allow me, Brandon. I want to roll space.
uh, don't flub, kids. It's not good for your health.
It, it's that said, it is also important to keep in mind that certain systems are in very specific types of settings and stuff where certain things are or are not well possible or not really represented necessarily. Like being a guitarist, for example. Okay, cool. Most systems either has one skill that handles that or none.
yeah.
So that's cool. Having a hobby for your character is generally a good idea to help characterize them, to help give them a little bit of depth. because that can give you a lot of questions you can ask yourself about your character that can inform a lot about their personality and stuff. But if you're sitting down to say a game of D&D or something similar and your concept is I want to be a guitarist, you're going to need a little bit more.
Yeah.
Now, D&D does make it a little bit easier with Bard being a class. It's like, okay, well, if you just want like music to be your shtick, Bard is right there. But if no, the guitar thing is just a hobby, okay, well, what are the other aspects of the character then? Because, for example, World of Darkness, say you're playing Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, you're a guitarist. Interesting. That tells me nothing else about your character in the scope of Vampire. Cool hobby to have. There's some interesting stuff you could do there, but it doesn't have anything to do with what your clan is as a vampire, what your stats are really, outside of having a few dots in performance. What your predator type is. It could give you some ideas in how to engage with some of that stuff and how to make some of those choices, but
Yeah.
you
As
there are some games where some ideas are not the fuel you need to shape the character, but may still give you like some supporting ideas. So it's
and those
just an important thing to note.
and those supporting ideas can help you build out a character. For example, one of the things that I did in a vampire game was I made a punk rock star. And excuse me. And there's the oh, what's the it's not a sub clan, but it's one of the like the lesser clans.
It's a bloodline.
Um like it was
Sisters of Cacophony.
Sisters of Cacophony.
Sorry, Daughters of Cacophony. Yeah.
Where am I thinking of sisters? I've been seeing a bunch of 40k stuff. I blame that. Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, Daughters of Cacophony. So I was just like, okay, I'm gonna make my character. They're gonna be a social character. I know that I want them to be a social character. I know that I want them to primarily focus in that area, but be dexterous and have like some dex skills for like combat and whatnot. Okay, cool. So now you figure out what kind of social I want them to be. Well, I want them to be a rock star. Cool. Done. Is there a bloodline that can help support all three of those things? There is. Hot diggity damn. I was looking at like 2 or 3 bloodlines realistically, but I went with Daughter Cacophony because it was one of the I wanted to play not one of the main bloodlines because I don't know, I'm quirky. Uh
Special
eh,
snowflake syndrome.
yeah, me and my fucking 5 paladin characters that I always make.
Yeah.
Uh and like all in all, I think I had like a decent character concept and I was moving towards
Yeah.
doing things. And things happened, but that's in the past and potentially the future.
Yeah, it can be a really good way of
Starting.
giving you the initial hook on fleshing out the character. To sit there and say, using your example, I want to be a punk rock star. Okay, cool. That's very evocative. There's a lot of ways you can go with that in Vampire, but it does give you a jumping off point because you can say, okay, well, this is the mortal concept. How is this reflected in how they were embraced into becoming a vampire? How is this reflected in their background dots? Because, having dots in fame has never blown up in a vampire's face before.
Never.
Yeah. In a game with the Masquerade in the title. So,
What could go wrong?
yeah. You can definitely take something, to go back to our previous example, like guitarist, and take that, ask some questions about the character, and really expand that into a properly fully fleshed out character that makes sense within the context of whatever the game is you're playing. Just understand that if the GM is like, hey, what are you playing? And you just say, a guitarist, 9 times out of 10, you haven't actually told them anything about what you're playing
Yeah, you've
other
offered
than
them
this
nothing.
kernel of what your character is doing.
You've offered them literally less than zero information.
Yeah.
All you've done
Like, if
is
it was
confuse them.
D&D and Brandon came to me and was like, "I'm playing a guitarist," I'm like, "So, a bard?" Question mark. Because you don't need to be a bard to play a musical instrument in D&D, so I'd still be like, I'm assuming here. I'm gonna need you to tell me some more.
Just,
So
play a bard and your art in bard be comedian. Just tell jokes.
yeah,
Tell the
so it's
party nothing but dad jokes.
oh god, awful. So another way to look into determining a character concept is to start by diving into the setting. You know, cool. You know what system you're playing and stuff, but a lot of systems have a variety of settings. Or maybe the system has one greater setting, but there's a lot of places within that setting. Using D&D, for example, there's a lot of settings, as well as easily the potential of homebrew settings.
Yeah.
So getting information on what is that world like if your DM is saying, yeah, actually, we're going to be playing in this country that is ran by wizards. And essentially, if you're a non-magic character, you're a second-class citizen in this country, and we're gonna be playing this story talking about like toppling this magocracy in this country. You could sit there and say, I kind of want my character to be one of the people that have been like, victimized, essentially othered or treated like less because they don't have magic, and play a martial character, if that sounds interesting to you. Or you could say, you know what? No, I want to role play against the stereotype for this setting and play a magic character who disapproves of treating people differently because of how much magic they have access to and want to topple this thing. So, setting can inform a lot of your character concept as well as limits for your character, because it could very well be that maybe your DM, assuming everybody is on board, is like, cool, we're going to play this very authoritarian magocracy game. None of you are allowed to play magic characters. And that could be a limitation. And there's a popular saying along the lines that limitation can breed creativity, or is a good breeding ground for creativity.
I have a
So,
component of that.
well, absolutely. Like, it is in a way correct. That doesn't mean you have to have limits to be creative, but having some restrictions helps you be creative, because far too often have I encountered the approach player. Here you go. You can do whatever you want. And then they sit there and they just stare at a blank character sheet,
Yeah.
and I
They
don't know.
they blue screen.
Yeah.
Don't blue screen. So one of the things that um like it's hard to think outside the box if there isn't a box. Think of it that way. But one of the
Yeah.
things that I see oftentimes with people making characters is they'll sit there and go, "Well, I want to do like six things." And none of them like line up. But they're going to try to force them all in together at the same time. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're you're actively like harming yourself
Yeah, keep the
from
scope of your character reasonable.
from like enjoying like certain aspects of your character because you're making your character too involved in other aspects. You're only going to realistically get so much time in the spotlight with a decent GM, and if you want to flesh out certain parts of your character, you need to know what those parts that you want to flesh out is. Being mindful of what everyone else is trying to do helps it that way when you're in the spotlight, it actually feels like, you're in the spotlight. Going
And
back to
you're not
the
taking it from somebody else.
yeah, you're not taking it from somebody else because you're trying to sit there and be good at everything. When
Actually, the worst people to deal with.
and
People who are
it's
willingly like, I'm taking the spotlight as much as possible. Stop it. Get some help.
yeah. Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in the spotlight, but there's something wrong with not only wanting to be in it, but make sure that you are the only one in it or you spend the most time in it.
Yeah, this isn't Magic the Gathering. You're not a blue player. This is a cooperative game that also includes telling a story as a group. You do not need to rob other people of their fun to have fun. If you do need to engage with the game that way, maybe don't play tabletop games.
Yeah, you're one of
Because
the
chances are rest of the group not gonna like that.
and you may find yourself without a play group.
Yeah. The groups I've seen where that kind of player thrives are groups of new players who don't know any better
Yep.
and just shrug and say okay because they don't have enough knowledge about the game that they don't feel confident in making any choices. So then this one player that wants to hog the spotlight just does constantly. And they're like, oh, yeah, they're great. They're so knowledgeable about the game and stuff. But once they get more experienced, that player becomes increasingly more annoying. So it's, I'm going on the assumption 99.9% of players aren't this kind of person. But,
No.
you know, if you have
Um,
concerns that somebody is actively trying to steal the spotlight from other people, it's time to have a discussion as a group or a one-on-one if you're the GM.
Correct. And that's just, something to keep in mind when you're going through your character concept is don't try to spread yourself out too thin or don't try to be the person that is doing everything. That's not fun for the rest of the table. On that latter point, on the first point, you're just harming what you're trying to do because you're going to be in too many places at once. You're spread too thin on your pieces. That being said, one thing that I do want to touch on, and this probably be a good point to go into backstories rather than just concepts. If you are making a backstory, there are some GMs who are going to be like, I want you to write me a novella
I will shoot you.
of,
I
of
will
your
actually show
backstory.
up at your front door within 30 minutes,
Or
regardless of
less,
where you are on the planet.
or the
That's a
slug is
guarantee.
free.
Yeah.
Um, but there are some GMs that want you to write a very detailed backstory. There are some GMs like myself and Zemian who are like, give me a paragraph. Now, I'm addressing this to a specific person that I think might be listening. I know you can hear me. I'm outside your door right now.
The sounds of aircraft missile lock.
You do
Thought we
not
have.
I understand if you like the idea of writing, if that concept excites you. You do not need to continuously build your backstory after handing it to the GM. Your backstory is supposed to support your character's decisions and path moving forward, not something that's supposed to be ever expanding that you're constantly building on. That's what the story's for. I understand that sometimes the GM may not move at the pace that you want, so you have to build somewhere because you want to write. Make a different character and do that who's not in the game, and then you can write your own story from there. Or cool your heels. Because to a certain point, if you keep adding to backstory, the character that you handed the GM is different than the character that you've now created.
Yeah.
This is problematic
The
because your
there's
fantasy for that character has dramatically changed between what you handed and what you have.
Yeah, there's one situation in which having an evolving backstory is okay, and that comes with the caveat of okay for a time. There are some players, I have known some of them, where they have a rough idea of a character. They don't have a lot of gas in the tank for a background. So they jump into the game without much in the way of background, and they feel the character out through play a little bit. And then they fill out the key parts of the background after play has begun, after they've gotten a feel for the character, and borrow some elements of the role play as well as the setting and stuff to help flesh that out in play. And then give a little bit of backstory to the DM that way. That is fine. If you want to do that, make sure you've talked to the GM about doing that. But there is, like Brandon is saying here, that threshold. There is a stopping point where you don't keep adding stuff. It just figure out those details. Don't keep adding stuff. When you have a decent amount, be like, okay, cool, I'm done. That's the backstory. Also, I will say this: do not make this fucking insane, unhinged power trip backstory. If you are making a level 1 character in D&D, your character has not slain a dragon, has not saved a kingdom, has not been on 100 adventures. Your character has not done a bunch of epic shit. Do not be that person who has this just insane rap sheet before the game even began.
You can have a character that says they've done all of that and have a con man.
Like a liar.
Yeah. Uh that's like the big thing to be aware of is don't make a character that that's been an adventurer for, oh, I've been an adventurer for 20 years. I'm in my 50s and, I've slayed a dragon or two, a minotaur, and I have the scars and the head on my hearth's mantle to prove it. No, you're level 1. What the fuck? What are you on about?
I would start finding that believable around maybe level 4, level 5. Maybe.
And like there like a lot of things that we've talked about, there is a certain caveat that I have. Because I have a character concept that I have not done, primarily because no one runs 5e in the way where it would be all right, or most GMs just don't want to fucking deal with it. I have a character concept that I've had in the bag for a while. It is an old elf wizard who has amnesia. The only thing that he knows is his name because it was on the inside of the hat. So he has to relearn all of his spells. How did he get amnesia? I don't know. I'm giving the GM a gun. The gun is loaded. How have I fucked up and became an amnesiac? I would give some ideas for myself because once again, I'd be handing in roughly a paragraph. So and so woke up in a village, remembering very little, not even his own name, not his childhood, nothing. But on the inside of his hat was a single name, and that's the name he goes by. That could be a brand name for all he knows. But I think making an amnesiac character would be interesting. But the GM has to be okay with the idea of going, okay, so you have the backstory of you're an amnesiac, and that's pretty much it. And you want me to fill in the blank. Because that can come off that way to a number of GMs. It absolutely can. But it's one of those things that, if you and the GM go, I'm gonna make an amnesiac, I have like a couple ideas of what he could be. Like he was an old adventurer that, got clonked on the head or tried to do something, like try to make himself immortal and accidentally wiped his own memory. Or, this is a clone from one of the mages that, went wrong because clone is a spell in D&D and it's fucking wild. So
Yeah.
it's it's one of those things that you could absolutely work with the GM with. It's like, hey, I want to fuck around and find out. I'm not saying that should be your default every time because you don't have the imagination to make a backstory where I'm an amnesiac. That's it. Don't do that. It's just,
Yeah, please don't. So many people end up using it as a crutch.
yeah,
And I am generally reticent to allow a player amnesia, because when I actually have a player in a game I'm running right now that has the amnesia flaw in Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. So when they when I was looking at their sheet, I was like, okay, so you're taking amnesia. What are your thoughts on that? And, we had that back and forth, and he was like, yeah, it sounds like fun. I don't really have anything particular in mind. I couldn't really come up with much of a backstory. And I was like, okay, so what are you looking for this? Like, is this just you really can't think of a backstory, or you're just not sure what rope to give me, really? And he's like, oh, yeah, no, if you want to use this as rope to hang me with, by all means. I was like, okay, that I'm fine with. Because you're saying, set me up for some shit.
yeah,
This is a blank check for you to create some fucking drama with my character. Um, and it's like, okay, cool, I can work with that, but there has to be that conversation of, do you as a player want to know ahead of time of what this stuff is going to be, or do you want to keep it? You have no idea. And in this case, he was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to even have a chance at metagaming it. I don't want to know. So it's like, okay, that's what we'll do then. But most of the time, especially like in things such as D&D and all that, when people like they have amnesia, they just don't want to be bothered, and it becomes a crutch. And it's like, in some situations that can be okay, but if you are thinking about taking amnesia, maybe instead consider just spending some time with the GM to help get some ideas, talk about the setting. Maybe if you're playing D&D, maybe if you're playing a wizard, figure out, did they actually go to a proper like school? Did they have a mentor? Did they mostly self-teach? Like, guided questions can take you a long way, as much as doing research on the setting and stuff could potentially give you ideas. Working with somebody else and going through a process of guided questions can do a lot of heavy lifting. So if you're really drawing blanks, there are a lot of different ways of going about things to help get those ideas cooking. And don't be like, if you're going to do guided questions, don't do guided questions like, well, don't leave it open ended with, well, how did you learn your magic? Well, I don't know. I guess I, read it from a book or something. Like, you can't be too vague. You need to be specific. Does your character have a mentor? Did they have a mentor? Yes. Are they still around? Are they, alive? I mean, you can start, you draw down with specific questions, you can start getting very specific answers. And this can create more questions. And you get more answers, and you start getting a clearer and clearer picture.
and that's one of the things like to keep in mind is your backstory is there to support your character moving forward. It is not necessarily always going to be the main focus. It can definitely come up in plots and that become a focus for a time, but don't make your backstory the entirety of your character. Your character is an individual in a setting that has their own dreams and aspirations and goals. They are not, oh, I'm a survivor of a attack on my village. And that's what you go with. Okay, well, you survived. What are you going to do now? Do you want to build a happy life? Why are you an adventurer then? Because that shit's dangerous. Are you out to get revenge on the person that orchestrated it or on the group that orchestrated it? That makes sense. But
Yeah.
don't just come to the GM with a character that is like, I am a big badass that swings a giant sword around and like enjoys heavy two-handed weapons. I'm really good at hitting things. Okay, that's kind of neat. Either there's a number of ways that you can do that. There's some things you can, you play big dumb stupid guy, or big guy, but is actually very eloquent. You can have some fun with that. However, if you go, I'm big dumb stupid guy, my backstory is my village got burned down by the Duke of Wellington. And the GM goes, cool, what is your character trying to accomplish? Well, the Duke died in that fire, so, he's got no one to take his revenge out on, so he's just wandering around. What? You have defined your character as a hobo. And there are interesting concepts you can have as a hobo. But if your backstory is your village burned down and the guy that did it died too already, what's your character doing? Like, why? You have to you should have a why for why your character does certain actions. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. And kind of moves into, I don't think it's
Motivations.
yeah. I don't think it's
Motivations and
necessarily like
goals.
higher end play for role playing, but your character should have a goal and motivation.
Yeah.
There's something that they want or something that they need. Why is your character doing this super dangerous mercenary work? Well, because my little sister is dying and I need to buy her medicine. Why is your character currently having an argument with every single member of the nobility? Because nobles are the reason why he doesn't have a family, or nobles have been keeping him down and he's an anti-establishment like anarchist. Those are something that you can work off of and something that you can have your character do based off that decision. If you go, there was a fire, I have no friends or family, and the person that started the fire is also dead. You've handed me nothing. You've handed me a backstory that says your character was once had something interesting happen to them, and then just started wandering around.
Let me give you a writing tip as somebody who went to school for writing. A really great way to generate story for a character is to ask yourself at given points, what is getting in the way of this character getting what they want? So, using your example of, you know, somebody burned my house down with my family still inside, it does suck to say, and then I hunted down and killed them in the backstory. That's not dramatic. That's not really interesting. It's more interesting to say, I'm still looking for them. What got in the way, what you wanted was justice, and you still haven't gotten it. Them escaping is what has gotten in the way of that. So now you have both a motivation and a goal. You're looking for this person. Now, we can twist things a little bit and say, well, what if I do want to have gotten them in the backstory? You know, what if I don't want to saddle the group with having to hunt this person down? That's valid if you want to go that way, but then you need to say, why does this matter to be in the backstory then? And what you could do is say, well, I got what I wanted, but I don't think it's really what I wanted. In the sense of perhaps you did hunt them down, find them, get justice, but maybe you went too far. Maybe you killed them. And maybe now that you're on the other side of it, you realize killing them was not the right thing to do. And now you have the weight of murder on your conscience. And your motivation is to maybe find some way to justify it in your mind, or maybe some way to come to terms with it, or maybe reestablish some kind of karmic balance for what you did. Whatever that might be. So maybe your goal is still a question mark, but your motive is to spiritually clean your hands or to make it right in some way, even if that is just, I'm going to be an adventurer, but I'm going to go help people. I'm going to be a positive influence in the world. So you can still have that and have it matter without saddling the party with the baggage of having to hunt somebody down in potentially a big wide world.
Or
But I would lean towards hunting the person down before recommending that, because most people kind of just forget to role play that aspect of the trauma of having killed somebody.
yeah. Or a different thing that can be done is violence begets violence. They burnt your family alive. You killed them. But, that person also probably has loved ones or people that cared about them or people that needed them who now need to settle the score.
Yeah.
So now you're being hunted.
So continues
So,
the chain.
yeah, so continues the circle of violence. We must, it is a wheel.
Yeah. When you're making backstory, you need to think about what is going to create some drama, what is going to create interesting interactions, what is a good hook that the GM can use. You do not want to jam that son of a bitch so full that it is all about your character all the time, because you have just buckets and buckets and buckets of backstory. You realistically probably only need 1 to 3 hooks, really, in your backstory of varying degrees.
Yeah. And we'll go
Probably only
over,
one major one if you're going to have multiple, and then a couple smaller ones.
yeah.
If murdering this person was your major one, perhaps you had a mentor who you initially learned some skills from, and then you went separate ways once you had gotten the basics. That's a minor hook, because maybe that's an NPC that the GM can bring back at some point or do something with. Or maybe they disappeared under mysterious circumstances because they were called away for some reason and they just didn't tell you. And so you could have a couple minor hooks like that in there, but don't put a ton of huge hooks into your backstory. You're generally playing a less experienced character out the gate. So they shouldn't have tons and tons of super dramatic, life defining events. Because
I
otherwise, it's like, fuck, you got too much
yeah.
shit going on in your life.
One of the few things I could think like where it's kind of okay to do that is when I think about vampire. Because vampire, there's like a huge emphasis drawn on you're not alive anymore. This is your undeath. What do you do in your undeath? So your character could have been a drug addict that owed money to the mob and, had a terrible home life. That's three easy things to sit there and build up. But then they die. That character would have been in a rough spot if they had stayed alive. But then they died and came back.
Hmm.
So what changed? What does your character do now? This they're no longer bound by the frail mortal concept of being of life. They are now a fuck mothering vampire.
Yeah.
So that has changed your character. And usually, you're not playing a character that just, freshly turned. Usually they build up from there. So you can sit there and square some of those circles, but, did you find a new addiction? Do you now owe someone else something? Is your situation with your cider complicated? You could sit there and have an interesting, it's like, I had these things in life, and in death now I have more or less the same thing. They're just different, and I can't escape them even by dying.
Yeah, like you can definitely get more in depth in Vampire because there's a lot of interpersonal dynamics that go on in there. That said, you're still not going to have a truckload of life changing events. You'll have a few key ones realistically,
Yeah.
and those are the ones that matter. If you bring me a backstory, and in the backstory I get a paragraph of how you were bullied in kindergarten, and then a paragraph about how, you were beaten by one of your parents, and then a paragraph about how your crush didn't reciprocate your feelings in 8th grade. I'm going to tell you, you have 2 paragraphs to cut here. Like, sorry, getting bullied in kindergarten isn't good fodder for a character in Vampire or D&D or most RPGs. There might be a couple where you're playing younger characters where it might matter, but by and
Yep.
large, it's not going to matter.
Or you're an
Your
async
crush
for the
not,
traditional method.
yeah, your crush not reciprocating your feelings. I mean, I'm not going to go into the diatribe of incel bullshit, but that also doesn't matter. I'd rather hear more about your major life events, like any potential abuses or a family member passing or, you know, anything that is directly motivating your character and actually affects how they operate within this game, within
Yeah.
this story.
And like that's just stuff to keep in mind when, filling out backstory. Make sure your character has clear motivations, clear goals. Don't try to square all your circles for your backstory. That's makes for realistically an uninteresting character to work with as a GM. And usually, in my experience, works with a character that's uninteresting to play as a player. Because I'll sit there and I'll ask all my players, give me backstories. And then one or two will give me a backstory. And then it's like, okay, well, I have subplots I can do now. Then those individuals will end up having more spotlight time. And then the people that didn't give me a backstory with any hooks or any backstory at all in some cases get nothing. And I have to worry about, it's like, well, what are their goals and aspirations now? Let's focus on trying to build that up. And that becomes, a problem. A fine example of a character that handed me a backstory, and I have definitely used it to apply a knife to their stomach, would be Osborne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in the Eclipse Phase game. It's just, I was given a tool. I, as a GM, am going to use it.
Well, you came to us and you said, "Hey, here's a situation, You all it's this year, you're pressed for money. You're going into this institute to do this research project on cryogenics, to be a test subject." And going on this idea of, okay, desperate for money. What's the kind of person who would do something extreme because they're desperate for money? Uh, and I came onto the thought of somebody they cared about, terminally ill. Okay. So good source of drama there, because I know going in, we're waking up a few centuries later. So, you know, that's emotional baggage for that character to have to deal with in some way, shape, or form, healthily or otherwise.
Yeah.
And start going down that checklist of, okay, well, who's the family member? How does it shake out? What exactly is going on there? And what makes that interesting? Could I have gone just, oh yeah, his wife or whatever? Yeah, I could have. But I felt it was more impactful to say, no, actually, because we very often as players play characters who haven't, quote, settled down. They've had a life, obviously. Everybody has a life. They've had stuff happen to them. They've had relationships of some kind or another, but they've not established a livelihood and settled down. They are in some state of flux typically. And so it's like, it would be crushing for a character to have already settled down, to then have it be threatened by this thing and then have to go to extremes to handle it, and then it still all gets taken away. So it's one of those things where there's limited interaction. Obviously, Brandon has done stuff to make interaction there, but it's very much, it's not about necessarily directly interacting with that backstory, but dealing with the baggage of the scars that come with that.
Correct. And again, that's probably gonna be a better topic for GM Grimoire. But
Yeah,
it's something that
absolutely.
a player should keep in mind.
If you want context, just, and you haven't watched it yet, go watch our Eclipse Phase Second Edition actual play. You do not need to get super deep into it to get the context.
No,
That shit happens in a couple episodes that it comes
like I
up.
think it's episode 2.
Yeah, it's hinted at in episode 1. The context comes up in episode 2, which I was
And
not ready for. Brandon just kind of fucking truck cunned me there.
yeah, well, one I'm given one backstory realistically.
Yeah, that goes back to what I'm saying. A lot of people, they imagine a character in flux who doesn't really have a lot established, because it gives them a little bit, as they say, tabula rasa, the blank slate, which can be all fine and dandy, but you know,
It's just something to keep in mind, and that's
yeah,
that's the primary thing is when you're making a character, your concept, your backstory, and your character's goals and motivations are all part of the story that's being told. A good GM will be able to incorporate that into the story in some shape, form, or fashion. And it's better for them and easier for them if you, as a player, collaborate with them on making that. Where you go, well, this is what happened to my character. Here's what they're trying to do.
yeah.
Because realistically, character concept for the most part is far more mechanical than it is role play.
Which
Typically,
actually
like,
brings up a very important point I want to hit.
yeah,
in regards to this. This talking about it gives GM, ammunition to do something with the game, specifically regarding your character. It is imperative if your GM is like, hey, this is going to be a more sandbox type of game, that is code for this is going to be a lot more character driven. I am telling you as a GM, if I'm saying it's going to be sandbox, you need a backstory. You need your character to have motivations and goals. Because if you don't, you're going to sit there and be like, I don't know what to do. Because your character has no motivations or goals. And in a sandbox game, you need those. You need to have something that is driving you to do stuff so that you can engage with the world. Because some GMs will run a sandbox game, literally drop you in the world and say, what do you want to do? And it is entirely up to you what you do. They don't have an overarching plot. Your engagement with the game will determine what the plot is. And I love running sandbox style games. I always run them where there is an overarching plot that is happening in the background. But if I'm saying we're doing sandbox, you need to think about this stuff and you need to have this stuff in mind. In the past, I've not been overbearing with players on it because if somebody doesn't want to write a backstory, previously I was like, well, that's a choice they can make. But now that I have matured in my running games and such, as a GM, I'm like, no. If I have to sit down and help you, I will, but you need to do this for your benefit. It may not come naturally to you, but there are tons of tools and advice available, as well as just talking to your GM or talking to the other players where you can do it. You just got to actually sit down and do it. And you cannot expect somebody else to do it for you. Like, if you're going to go to the GM and be like, can you help me make this backstory? And then you're going to essentially make them do all the work. No. It's your character. You should take some ownership of it. Make something that appeals to you so that you'll engage.
Yeah.
So sandbox type games, in general, you should do it, but especially in a sandbox game, you gotta do it. Otherwise, you're screwing yourself in the experience.
And that's one of the big things to keep in mind is that when making a character in the story, they are a part of the story. You are playing in this game to be a part of a story. Typically, there are some games out there and some GMs who's just like, I'm not really looking to tell a story. I'm just like, I got a thing that I want to try and I want to see how everyone likes it. That's fine. Uh, but it's just a thing to keep at the forefront of your mind when you're making your character. That on a mechanical level, that's what the concept is for. Is what do you want the character to do? What do you want them to be good at? And then the backstory is, okay, why are they good at it? Why have they gotten good at it? Why do they do this? And then goals and motivations is, what are they going to do with this concept? Based on their backstory. I have a punk guitarist vampire. He was a musician, he got embraced. And now his goal is to gain power and influence by getting more and more famous. All very
Which
simple.
totally won't blow up in his face.
Totally won't blow up in his face.
It's not like there's some overarching rule of thumb to not embrace famous people.
I'll be fair. Wasn't famous at the time.
Yeah.
Got but and just, keep all that in mind. Let's see. We've touched on concept, backstory, motivations. We already kind of briefly covered the Stormwind fallacy. I don't know if you want to dig in a little bit more on that, or if you just
It's definitely more of a conversation from the mechanical end of the game. There, that's kind of a big conversation. There, I'll give a short version for now, and we'll dig into it when we talk about the mechanical end of things. There is this wrong but idea that exists within the tabletop community that some people still repeat, or at least hit the talking points of this idea that if you min max, you cannot roleplay. That if you focus on the mechanics of your character, that somehow that is preventing you from doing good roleplay. This is factually incorrect. It is objectively false. This line of thinking comes from the misconstruing of what min-maxing is, because the reality is the tabletop role-playing game space is constantly evolving. In a way, it helps to imagine it as tabletop games as a type of technology, in a way. It is a technology that is evolving. Even just looking at how games are made, mechanics are continuously changing. We're finding new ways to mechanically represent different kinds of things. It is an evolving field. The technology is changing, and when the technology changes, the vocabulary changes. And a lot of the vocabulary is also in flux because a lot of conversations regarding different things happen in insular spaces with niche groups. And so generally, there are a lot of terms that have a multitude of meanings. One of those meanings being min-maxing or min-maxer. This idea that there's, in my experience, there are two definitions that are kind of the big umbrella versions that people are generally referring to. The first, which in my opinion is the one that everybody should be using, is a min-maxer is somebody who minimizes aspects of a character's stats, their mechanics, in order to wholly maximize areas that they care about. This is the idea of, well, I'm playing a barbarian. The game is going to allow me to actually reduce my base 10 intelligence to a 7 and allow me to get extra points out of that where I can put somewhere else. So I could take those points and put it into like strength or constitution or dexterity, because I'm playing a very physical character and I don't think he's very well read. So he's not very intelligent in the sense that doesn't really know a lot about history and stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean he's an idiot, just he's not a well-read guy. That is what I feel personally should be the textbook definition of min-maxing. There are people out there who also use it to refer to what really should be called power gaming. The idea of minimizing one's weaknesses to maximize their capabilities. They are essentially trying to make a character without flaw. I feel like that is an incorrect definition. I would call this a power gamer.
yeah.
Power gamer being somebody who, the term also gets used as munchkin, but I do not see that term come up very often. Power gamer being somebody who is all about a total and utter power fantasy at the cost of everything else. They care about winning in this cooperative game that's not about winning. They care about winning encounters, winning the game, being in the spotlight as much as possible, having no weaknesses, having no flaws, having no way to beat their character, etc., etc. I'm not talking about these people. That's a conversation for that other episode.
Yep.
But Stormwind fallacy is a fallacy in the idea that, well, if you're going to play a barbarian and specifically lower your intelligence so you can boost your stats that help you barbarian better, you inherently are worse at roleplay. I mean, the short version here just is objectively incorrect. That's why it's a fallacy.
Your Honor, example A of why that's bullshit. Travis Willingham.
True. He makes very functional characters, and roleplay is really good.
Yes.
Same can be said about
Taliesin Jaffe.
Liam and Taliesin. Although Talison's dice love to fuck him, so you know
they do. That's not.
Yeah.
You can't build better dice.
It's just surface. It's just surface level. It may not necessarily look like it. This is the dice are fucking him.
God damn it.
Yeah. The mechanics do not. Generally speaking, mechanics are not stopping you from role playing. Spending time on fleshing out your character mechanically is not going to stop you from role playing. If you're somebody who thinks this way, that thinks that anybody who min maxes, in my definition of min maxing, can't role play, that's a player problem. That is not a fact of the hobby.
No.
The reality is you have encountered a player who min maxes and is just bad at role playing.
They exist.
Yeah, min maxing and role playing are not mutually exclusive elements. You can have both. You can also have somebody who is dog shit at building characters and is dog shit at role playing. It happens.
It does.
And sorry, I'm just going to say the quiet part. I don't think neutering your main stat that your character needs to function makes for interesting RP. I think it makes you dead weight in the group. That's my personal feeling. If I was a player and you were like, I'm going to play a wizard who has a +0 or a +1 in their casting stat, I'm going to ask you to not as another player, because that's annoying as shit to have somebody who's going to be like, I'm going to play this thing and purposely be really bad at it mechanically. It's one thing to role play an amateur. It's another to mechanically be incapable in an area that we're counting on you to be capable at. That's my 2 cents on that. We'll dig into it more on the mechanical episode for building characters, whatever that'll be called. But
I have no idea yet.
Yeah. And also, I'll say this. Mechanics can be a fantastic way of actually informing your roleplay.
Absolutely.
I played a character in Vampire the Masquerade who he was generally a pretty likable dude. He had average charisma, but he didn't have a lot of social skills. So, he was kind of likable, kind of jokey, but he often said things out of turn, made sideways comments, or occasionally just couldn't really say the right thing in certain situations. He was trying to comfort somebody when they were deeply upset about something. And he kind of was he wanted to do something to help comfort them, and all he could think was, vampires like blood. I should offer to go get them some blood. And if anything, it just highlighted the fact of why they're in this situation, essentially. And that is absolutely a move with somebody with no social skills would pull. Because, read the room, guy. It's like, sorry. I did that, and people were like, come on, man. And I was like, he has no social skills. What do you want me to do? Like, he's fucking inept. So there are ways that mechanics can inform roleplay, and if you are more mechanically minded, that doesn't mean you can't roleplay. I do know some people that are more mechanically minded do have a harder time because they are more concrete thinkers as opposed to abstract thinkers. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It might just mean it'll take you more practice to get into the swing of doing those things. So don't be discouraged. Don't think you can't do it. Don't think you are in this box over here. You can do it. It's a skill. You just have to spend some time practicing. That is
And
my 2 cents.
And it takes time. Like, don't go into a situation where it's like, I'm gonna be the only one role playing. I'm gonna be the weird one. You're all sitting at a table, uh, pretending. It's fine. If people can't acknowledge the hilarity in that, like as a concept, then they don't get it. Like my favorite T-shirt that I've seen, I just went to the Ren Fair recently, and it's a very meta shirt of, yeah, we're just a bunch of nerds in the woods playing dress up and pretend, along with
Yeah.
other things, and I'm like, that's funny. I love that. I didn't buy this shirt because I don't go places, so I don't have to wear clothes.
Yeah. We only have one LARPer in our group, really, so.
Yeah. Still need to get them a shirt.
Yes.
Still need to work on that. But if you feel uncomfortable role playing or with the character concept you have, talk to people. I know that can be a scary thing to do, but at the end of the day, you're all trying to enjoy a hobby together. So try to talk to them, try to see if there's a way that you can communicate it. That is just like, hey, I'm looking to lean in more into this, I'm looking to do this. Because if you don't communicate, then they don't know, and that can lead to other problems. Like someone may not know that they are actively like hurting like your character fantasy if you don't tell them.
Yeah.
So, just things to keep in mind. Communicate. Like everything in these GM Grimoire and player portfolio, two big rules: communicate. Don't be an asshole.
True.
A lot of if you want to boil everything down to brass tacks, communicate. Don't be an asshole. It's that simple. A lot of life could be applied that way.
Super true. Fortunately, a lot of people struggle with that second part.
And there are some people who struggle with the first part. There's more people that struggle with the second part, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got nothing because after this it'd be more mechanic stuff.
I'm gonna say there's, like I said, there are resources out there. If you're somebody who has a hard time, there are absolutely stuff out there. Especially if you're playing D&D, there are tons of things out there for like charts to roll like backstory ideas on. There's also a lot of more generic kind of backstory helper tools that are like charts and stuff. There are also random generators out there. I mean, hey, some people might hate the suggestion, but it could help drum up some ideas. Fire up ChatGPT and be like, hey, this is my character idea. What are some backstory ideas? And it could spit dog shit at you. I'm not saying copy paste from ChatGPT. Don't do that. However, it might give you some ideas to get the juices flowing. It might have a kernel of something good in there and be like, ooh, I'll take that and I'm going to flesh that out. I'm going to expand on that.
Gonna run with it.
Of course, you can always sit down with your GM. Hopefully, they have a pretty open door policy where you can go talk to them. If not, maybe get a new GM and be like, "Hey, I want some help. You know, talk me through this, whatever." There are also, in general, look for general writing aids for building characters. Like, you don't need to look specifically within the context of tabletop RPGs. You can look at general creative writing guides and helpful tools and stuff for making compelling characters. Tons of stuff out there. For RPGs, I would definitely say look for like character questionnaire type stuff that ask questions about characters. For example, a really fun one I heard, not a full questionnaire. I do want to make my own questionnaire for players, but there's a really fun one from, oh, shit, what was that podcast? Rage Across the Internet. They were talking about how they go about making werewolf characters for the titular Werewolf the Apocalypse game. And they have questionnaires that they use for making characters. And one of the questions on there is, what type of ice cream does your character like? Which at first seems like a very innocuous question. It's like, what the fuck does that matter? Can you count how many times on your hand you've actually had a character have ice cream in a tabletop game? Like, if at all. So, what's the fucking point of this? Why does it matter what ice cream flavor my character likes in my game about playing 9 foot tall murder monsters trying to save the planet? Because you could sit there and answer the ice cream question and say, they just like vanilla, and just move on and not even think about it. Or you can sit there and say, what would be their favorite? Why would it be their favorite? And that's the big important question. Why is that their favorite? Sure, the answer can be, they just like chocolate.
Okay.
Or, they just like vanilla and they're just a basic bitch like that. That's totally fine. However, the example they had in their podcast, which I think perfectly encapsulates the idea of why doing these questionnaires can be helpful, is they thought about it and they said pistachio, but it's not actually. Vanilla is their favorite. But they'll tell people pistachio because they want to appear more adult. That speaks volumes about this character if that's the only thing you know about them. That alone can tell you so much about the character. They're telling people, I like pistachio, even though they fucking hate it. Because now it tells you they're insecure in who they are. They want the approval of those around them. They desperately want to be perceived as an adult. They have problems with being perceived as a child. And that gives you a lot of fuel to sit there and say, well, why is that? What happened? What has informed this line of thinking? Why are they in this situation? So on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's such a dumb, simple thing that can actually reveal a lot of serious details about your character. So that's something I like to think about every once in a while when I'm thinking about a character. Not necessarily specifically what kind of ice cream do they like, but what kind of food do they like? What is their go-to snack? Things like that. It's such small, innocuous, stupid shit, but it can sometimes give you some serious insights into how they think. And the more you understand how they think, the easier it is to roleplay that character.
I mean, yeah. I like my stupid innocuous bullshit makes up who I am for sure. Much to the chagrin of some people I know. But
Mm-hmm.
there's more to the person than I. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. There's generally more to a character than that. So, just
Yeah,
something to keep in mind.
absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we've given out a good amount of advice. After this would be mechanical based advice. But
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of theory because we're going to try to keep it, as with all this, system neutral. So it's not so much going to be build advice for a specific game, but it is going to be about mechanically approaching the character. I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about, getting stats that help me do my async thing using my Eclipse Face character as an example.
yeah,
So touched on it a little bit here, but we're going to dive much deeper. We'll have a deeper discussion about Stormwind Fallacy. What exactly is power gaming? What exactly is min maxing? Stuff like that. What exactly is being a dead weight?
yeah, that's gonna need some definition.
Yeah, I have a couple real world examples. Well, one in particular example, which wasn't even mechanically related, but we'll talk about it.
We'll go over it.
It is important to that conversation just because we're going to be having that conversation.
But I want to thank everybody for listening, and we hope to have you on the next one.
Yeah, hopefully this was helpful and
You
you
got
know,
something from it.
yeah, yeah. Even if you are just a GM or if you're a player who already knows this stuff, maybe we brought up some ideas that will maybe hadn't occurred to you before, and give you some ideas on how to approach things.
But I want to thank you all for listening again, and hope to have you on the next one.
Oh, bye bye.
Bye.